A 6-year-old boy vanished without a trace amid the lively music of the 1983 autumn fair, leaving behind a muddy shoe and a mother's broken heart for 35 years. No one found a clue, no explanation until a strange voicemail echoed in the night. "Mom, it's Jeremy." The journey to uncover the truth led the aging mother into the dark lair of a deceptive organization, where children's identities were erased, pasts reprogrammed, and memories manipulated like a toxic trance. The soft patter of rain on the porch seemed to stretch the gloomy October night in Cedar Hollow, Kentucky, into eternity. In the small house at the end of Maple Street, the only one still lit near midnight, Margaret Holtz sat silently in an old armchair, wrapped in a gray wool blanket, her weary eyes gazing out a fogged window. Beside her was a cold cup of tea and a silent landline phone on a wooden shelf. 35 years had passed since that fateful day, but Margaret clung to her routine: same phone number, same old machine, same house. She still waited for what the world called hopeless: a sign, a message, something about the son who disappeared in the crowd at the 1983 autumn fair. Jeremy Holtz, 6 years old, with bright brown eyes and thin golden hair like ripe wheat, slipped from her grasp in an instant. And then, nothing. No cry, no blood, no trace, just void. The wall clock struck 11:12 p.m. When the phone rang, a sharp, cold sound tearing through the stillness, making Margaret's heart clench. No one called at this hour. Her hand trembled as she lifted the receiver. No one answered on the other end. Only a brief silence, then a beep, a voicemail. She set the receiver down, took a deep breath, and waited for the message to play. But the next moment froze her blood like ice. A voice came through, small, thin, hoarse, perhaps a child's. No, not perhaps. She knew that voice. It was Jeremy's. "Mom, it's Jeremy. I don't know where I am. It's dark. They told me not to talk, but I have to. I miss you. I miss home." Then static, a few metallic clanks, and silence. The message lasted barely 15 seconds, but left Margaret paralyzed, her mind spinning like a storm. She gasped, hands gripping the chair, body trembling. It wasn't a prank. No one could mimic Jeremy's voice. The voice of a boy who asked every night before bed, "Can I go to the fair again tomorrow, Mom?" Emotions surged: doubt, fear, hope, horror. She played the message again and again. Each time, her heart tore further. Jeremy's voice was unchanged, not older, as if time had frozen in that child's body. But how? She wondered, eyes welling. If Jeremy was alive, if somehow he'd been held somewhere all these years, who did it? Who stole him from her arms, her family, his childhood? She rushed to the bedroom, rummaging through drawers for the black notebook where she'd logged every strange call, every suspicious detail over 30 years. She flicked on the desk lamp, flipping pages. The caller ID was blank, but her old answering machine, with its call tracing feature, had picked up a signal from Monroe County, Tennessee, a place she'd never heard of. No relatives, no acquaintances, no one from there. Margaret sank onto the bed, her heart twisting. Could someone have kept Jeremy all these years, never letting him out, never letting him contact his family? And why now? Why this moment? A cold, rainy October night. She reached for the old photo frame on the nightstand, the only picture left of the three of them from the morning before the fair. Jeremy stood in the middle, grinning, holding his parents' hands. Alan, her husband, gone nearly 3 decades in a car accident, had been the first to search every stall for their son, collapsing in the crowd. She remembered his haunted eyes that day, and from then on, every look in town carried pity. The woman who lost her child, the man who drank himself to death, a shattered family. Margaret pressed the photo to her chest, tears falling endlessly. She'd once accepted she might die without knowing the truth. But one message, just 15 seconds, had ripped through the dust of time covering her heart. That voice, if real, meant Jeremy was out there somewhere. It meant someone had kept her son for 35 years. And maybe, if she acted fast, if she was resolute, she could find him. Fear and doubt had no place in her mind now. She'd spent a lifetime in darkness. She wouldn't let that recording be the last of Jeremy. Not this time. Never again. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated with the latest stories. On the afternoon of September 29, 1983, Cedar Hollow buzzed like a harvest festival. Late autumn sunlight spilled over the central square, where the annual fair was in full swing. Colorful stalls lined both sides of the street. Buttery popcorn, sticky cotton candy, a carousel's music, ring toss games for stuffed animals. Adults laughed. Children played. The scent of funnel cakes, mingling with fresh earth after morning rain, created a familiar yet overwhelming aroma. The Holtz family arrived at noon. Margaret wore a pale floral dress, holding Jeremy's hand, while Alan snapped photos with an old camera, capturing their son's every moment. The 6-year-old, in a red baseball cap, tilted to one side, eyes gleaming like lanterns, darted from stall to stall, shouting excitedly and tugging his mother's hand, "I want to shoot the ducks. I want vanilla ice cream. Mom, look, a straw dinosaur." Margaret smiled, her heart swelling with simple, complete joy. Her only son, born late after years of treatments, was a miracle in every smile. At 3 o'clock, after his second ice cream, and winning a yellow stuffed bear, Jeremy pointed to a corner of the fair, where the stuffed animal wheel stall stood, its strange toys dangling under red-orange lights. "Mom, I want to go there. Can I?" Margaret knelt, wiped his mouth, and hesitated. "It's far, Jeremy. Do you know the way back?" "I do," he grinned. "Past the sausage stand, left at the clown with the trumpet, and I'm there." Alan chimed in. "Let him go, it's just a few minutes. Our boy's smart." Margaret wavered but, seeing Jeremy's eager eyes, nodded. "5 minutes, okay? I'll wait here. No talking to strangers, got it?" Jeremy nodded vigorously, hugged his bear, and ran off, his small figure blending into the bustling crowd. Margaret stayed by the balloon stand, eyes fixed on where he'd gone. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. She started toward the stall, calling, "Jeremy, where are you?" No answer, no sign of the boy in the red cap. She quickened her pace, pushing through the crowd, calling louder. Alan sensed trouble and ran over. "He's not back?" Margaret panted. "I can't find him." They split up, searching the game area, restrooms, food stalls. Nothing. An hour later, the fair's loudspeaker announced a missing child. 2 hours later, police arrived. Everyone at the fair was asked to help. The search expanded to the surrounding area, grassy fields, parking lots, even the forest edge. No one saw Jeremy leave the fair. No one recalled seeing him after 3 o'clock. A stall worker mentioned a man in a long gray coat near the games, but no one could confirm his identity. By 9 p.m., as the fair's lights dimmed, police found a child's shoe by a wooden fence, a white and blue striped sneaker Margaret had put on Jeremy that morning. Muddy, but no signs of a struggle, no blood, no other footprints. It just sat there. Margaret screamed when she saw it. Alan stood frozen, drained of life. That night, the town barely slept. Volunteers scoured every inch of grass with flashlights. Police searched ponds around the park. Metal detectors were brought in. But Jeremy was gone, as if he'd never existed. The days that followed were hell. Jeremy's face was plastered on every pole, window and gas station. The news exploded. Psychologists and missing child experts from the city were called in. Margaret fainted twice in a week. Alan began drinking nightly. Police traced every stranger at the fair, checked vehicles leaving town during the suspected time. Nothing suspicious. No evidence. No solid testimony. No leads. 6 months later, the investigation closed with a chilling phrase, "Cause, or perpetrator unknown." Margaret refused to accept it. She wrote to the FBI, hired private investigators, traveled to nearby towns, asking anyone who might have seen a 6-year-old blonde boy with a small scar behind his left ear. All in vain. Then, everything fell silent, as if Jeremy was just a breeze passing through their lives. The fair went on the next year, but the Holtzes never returned. Neighbors whispered that Margaret had lost her mind, that Alan was destroying himself with alcohol. No one blamed them. The loss was beyond human endurance. But that night, 35 years later, when the voicemail played in the dark, when the familiar voice called, "Mom" again, all the pain, all the memories, all the nightmares of that fateful fair afternoon in 1983 came rushing back, vivid and sharp, as if they'd never faded. After that fair, the Holtz family's life fell into a dark void with no return. Margaret, once cheerful and resourceful, became a shadow. Each morning, she opened Jeremy's bedroom window, though nothing remained but an empty bed and a silent wardrobe. His small shirt still neatly hung, gathering dust over the years. Each evening, she set 3 plates on the table, knowing no one would sit at the small chair at the end. Alan, once strong and confident, crumbled from within. He stopped taking photos, mowing the lawn, or speaking more than a few words daily. First beer, then whiskey, then vodka. Alcohol became his only friend, briefly silencing Jeremy's laughter in his mind, his son's eyes in his dreams. In 1986, they moved from downtown to a quiet Cedar Hollow suburb, away from prying eyes and whispers. But the old photos, missing child flyers, and the box with the lone shoe came along, carefully stored in a wooden cabinet by the hallway. Sometimes, Margaret opened the box, touched the paper, and whispered, "Where are you, Jeremy?" As if her patience, her sincerity, could pierce the fog of time to reach her son. In 1989, the police sent a final report, no new developments. That was the system's way of closing the door. But Margaret never closed her heart. Every September 29th, she walked to the old park. Once the fairground, now just bare land and maple trees, leaving a stuffed bear and a white daisy. No one joined her anymore. By 1991, Alan was gone, killed in a car accident on a rainy night, his vehicle skidding off a mountain road on his way back from a bar. People said he'd drunk too much. Margaret believed he'd lost any reason to stay sober. At his funeral, only a few attended. No one dared mention Jeremy. They knew, for Margaret, Alan's death wasn't the start of her grief. It was the end of a song that lost its melody long ago. After that, she lived alone. She didn't remarry, didn't move, didn't change her phone number. The cream-colored landline on the wooden shelf stayed plugged in, always by her bed. She said, "If Jeremy comes back, he'll know where to call." People told her to get therapy, to let go, to forgive life. But how do you forgive the incomprehensible? How do you let go of a child when you don't know if he's alive or dead? Years passed. The fair continued, but she never went. Children born in 1983 grew up, some now parents. Whenever news broke of a found missing child, or an article mentioned an unidentified boy somewhere, Margaret clipped it, storing it in a box in her drawer. She learned to use recorders, fax machines, computers, just to keep sending and receiving information. But Jeremy remained a silent name. Some said she lived in delusion. Some pitied her. Most forgot. The small town had other concerns. A closed factory, people leaving, schools merging. Margaret aged quietly. But deep in her heart, in every breath, every morning she woke, every night she dreamed, Jeremy was still there, still 6, still in his tilted red cap, laughing in the fair's crowd. And then, on an autumn night in 2018, when she thought she'd die with a heart never healed, that voice rang through the phone's speaker. "Mom, it's Jeremy." 6 short words shook a grief she thought had turned to stone. And Margaret knew, though it meant crossing what remained of her old age, her pain, her despair, she could not sit still another second. If Jeremy was alive, there was hope. And if there was hope, she'd follow it to the ends of the earth. As the sun rose through the shedding maple trees, Margaret sat at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on the small recorder next to her cold coffee. She hadn't slept. That voice, fragile but etched into her bones, echoed endlessly in her mind. Each replay revealed more. Hurried breaths, sounds like dragging chains, a steady thump like footsteps or an old machine. She couldn't analyze it alone, but she knew who could. Kelsey, her niece who called her aunt, was a senior in software engineering at Nashville University. Smart, sharp, sometimes cold, but the only relative who didn't see Margaret as a delusional old lady. Margaret dialed. "Are you busy, Kelsey? I need to talk. It's urgent." Her voice was hoarse, trembling, but Kelsey paused only a second before saying, "I'm coming over." 2 hours later, Kelsey sat across from her in the living room, laptop open, earphones on, her face shifting from indifference to focus. She played the recording 3 times, then uploaded it to audio analysis software. Her eyes narrowed at a strange signal buried in the background. "There's something in the bass layer. Let me filter the noise." Kelsey typed swiftly, then played the cleaned audio. Jeremy's voice was clearer, but now there was a metallic echo, like sounds in a confined space. A distant engine hummed steadily, not modern, but like an old generator. Then a thud, like something hitting a wall. "It sounds like a small room, maybe underground, or in an old warehouse," Kelsey said. "This isn't a normal house," she pointed to a brief segment where sound waves overlapped. "There's micro data here, possibly a GPS signal, embedded from the recording device." After a few minutes, she looked up. "It's faint, but the coordinates point near the Tennessee border, a town called Logan. Margaret held her breath. The unfamiliar town's name sparked no memories, but the thought that her son's voice came from a real place made her heart race. "Can you take me there?" she asked, almost whispering. Kelsey hesitated, then nodded. "I think we should." 3 days later, they set out. The drive to Logan was nearly 200 miles, through forests ablaze with autumn colors. The deeper they went into the countryside, the weaker the cell signal, but Margaret's resolve grew clearer. Logan was a small town, once a copper mining hub, abandoned after the plant closed in the late 90s. Most residents had left, leaving only a few elderly holdouts. The air felt eerie, unnaturally quiet, as if the earth swallowed sound. When their car stopped by an old cemetery on a red dirt road, Margaret felt a chill. Crooked tombstones stood amid overgrown weeds, and at the cemetery's edge was a small, peeling wooden house, nearly derelict. As they stepped out, a raspy voice called, "You're not from around here." An old woman, hair white as frost, stood on the porch, squinting at the strangers. "We're just looking for information," Margaret said softly. "I lost a child, and there's reason to believe this place is connected." The woman stared into Margaret's eyes for a long moment, then nodded. "I'm Ruby. Lived here my whole life. Come inside and talk." In the dilapidated house, Ruby brewed tea and pointed toward the cemetery. 30 years ago, the old church over there ran an orphanage. No sign, no records. Just a few kids, most unfamiliar, brought in and gone soon after. Margaret's heart clenched as she asked, "Do you remember a boy, about 6, blonde, with a small scar behind his left ear?" Ruby went silent for a long time. "Yes, they called him Thomas, but he never spoke to anyone. Stayed there about a year, then was taken somewhere. We saw him daily at the cemetery, sitting by an unmarked grave, under the willow, just sitting, whispering to himself." Margaret leaned back, feeling her body sink. Could it be? The voice from a graveyard of time now had a form, a person, a name. A piece had fallen into place. But this was only the beginning. And she knew, beyond Logan's rusted iron gate, the truth still waited, hidden in the cold earth, the whispering wind, and the murmurs of children no one remembered. The small motel room in Logan had only one window overlooking a dirt road covered with rotting maple leaves, where faint autumn sunlight crept through the trees, groping for the last traces of warmth. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a worn notebook where she'd recorded every detail from yesterday's meeting with Ruby. The name Thomas, the child who lived in the mysterious orphanage, echoed in her mind, an unpredictable reverberation from a buried but restless past. Kelsey was on the phone with an old friend at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, checking old Logan resident records. "There's no official data on any orphanage in that area from 1980 to 1995, she said, hanging up, her face tense. "It's like everything was erased." Margaret wasn't surprised. She was too familiar with how places tied to pain often came with deliberate silence. She stood, tucked the notebook into her purse, and said firmly, "We're going back to the church." The entrance to the old church lay behind a rusted iron fence, its gates secured with a broken chain, as if someone had tried to hide it, then given up halfway. The building, though crumbling and decayed, still exuded a somber, eerie dignity, like a silent witness to things no one dared name. The main door was completely rotted. They pushed it lightly, and it creaked open dryly. Inside, the dim light filtering through the broken roof cast speckled gold patches on the peeling wooden floor. Shattered pews, a collapsed pulpit, and a crooked, lonely cross remained. They moved toward the stairs leading to the basement, where Ruby said children were locked when disobedient. The basement was cold and damp, with a thick moldy smell that seemed to seep into every pore. The stone walls bore scratch marks, jagged lines, like those made by small fingernails. Then they saw it. The room at the end of the hall, its door was ajar, revealing a heavy darkness. Kelsey turned on her flashlight. The beam swept the corner, illuminating a dust-covered wall with crude chalk drawings, a woman with long hair next to a child in a red cap. Below was a scrawled, distorted line. "Jemmy plus Mom," with a trembling question mark. Margaret froze. That was the name only one person ever called her. Jeremy. When learning to write, he'd left out an R. She never corrected him, finding it heartbreakingly sweet. "It can't be a coincidence," she whispered. Her voice choked. Kelsey swung the light to the opposite side, a corner with a pile of cardboard scraps, beneath which was an old cassette box. so dusty they had to blow hard to read the label. Thomas, September 5, 1993. Margaret's hands shook as she pressed play. The sound crackled from the small speaker, scratchy, muffled, but clear enough to hear a child's whisper, "Mom, where are you? I miss you. They won't let me out. I'm scared," accompanied by a metallic creak, like a chair, and a man's echoing voice, "Quiet boy, your mom's not coming. No one knows you're here." The recording cut off with a sharp metallic screech. Margaret clutched her chest, collapsing, tears spilling without restraint. Kelsey bit her lip, eyes red but composed. "I'll save this file and analyze it further." The man's voice might help identify him. They left the church as the sun tilted, late daylight streaming through the collapsed dome, casting beams like swords piercing the dark. Margaret looked back one last time. Beneath the drawn wall, nearly hidden by dust, was a small object. A child's faded red baseball cap, overturned. She stepped forward, trembling, and picked it up. Under the brim, 2 letters were embroidered in gold thread. J.H. Jeremy Holtz. Her world collapsed and ignited at once. No more doubt. Jeremy had been here. Locked away, called by another name, forgotten amid stone walls and voiceless screams. Margaret stared at the cap, then at the purpling sky, a deep rage rising within. Someone had done this to her son, and that someone, or those people, remained unexposed. But now, they'd left a trace, and she would follow it to the end. Even if it meant returning to the cemetery 100 times. Even if it meant facing doors locked by silence and fear. Even if it meant confronting a system that chose to forget. She'd found his voice, his memory, his evidence. All that remained was the truth, and the truth, no matter how deeply buried, would one day rise from the dark. Rain fell at dawn the next morning, pelting the rusted tin roof of the old motel like the tapping of memories trying to return. Margaret sat by the window, the faded red cap on her lap, her fingers tracing the worn gold-stitched DH. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the cold stone walls of the church basement reappeared, along with the faint whisper of a child calling for his mother in despair. That was the voice stolen from her 35 years ago. The call that buried her life in pain, now rising from the grave of silence. Kelsey entered with a stack of papers and her laptop. "I ran a preliminary voice analysis," she said, looking straight at Margaret. The man's voice in the recording matches traits from a 1995 child abuse investigation in Polk County. His name was Elwood Marner, a pastor. Margaret's hands clenched until they whitened. "Was he tied to this church?" Kelsey nodded. "I checked old property records. The church where we found the drawings and cassette was owned by a small religious group called Grace Family Restoration, registered under Elwood Marner from 1981 to 1994. After that, the group dissolved, and Marner vanished from public records." Vanished? No one knows where he went. Rumors say he was prosecuted, but acquitted for lack of evidence, then fled. It's unverified. Margaret took a deep breath and stood. "We're going back to the church. This time, thoroughly." The rain had eased when they arrived. The rusted gate stood unchanged, silent, as if untouched. They brought high-powered flashlights, gloves, and a small chest-mounted camera Kelsey prepared. Back in the basement, the room where Jeremy had been held felt colder, quieter, as if the sounds once present had been drained. They scoured every wall, every stone floor. Behind a pile of broken furniture, Kelsey spotted a small gap between 2 wall slabs. "Something's back there," she pried gently with a folding knife, dislodging a stone to reveal a meter-deep hollow containing an old wooden box, locked with copper wire. They carefully pulled it out. The box was surprisingly heavy, covered in cobwebs but untouched by rot, as if placed for long-term preservation. Margaret opened it, and what lay inside stunned them. Handwritten papers, cassettes, black and white photos of children, and a notebook titled Guide to Soul Shepherding. Beneath the cover, scrawled words, "For the missioned only." Kelsey photographed each page. The notebook detailed control phases, language purification processes, and behavioral tracking schedules for children. One entry read, Week 3, child resists. Week 5, child begins to forget name. Week 9, child stops mentioning family. Week 12, begins calling spiritual father father. A smaller note, tucked between pages, made Margaret shudder. Thomas tends to recall old name, recommend transfer to quiet room. Monitor further. Below was the date December 4th, 1993. Quiet room, Margaret repeated. There must be another room. They searched the church's main floor above the basement. Kelsey noticed an oddly cracked tile in the prayer hall. Removing it revealed a small iron hatch, locked with a rusted clasp. After minutes of prying, they opened it. A foul stench rose, sharp and thick like decay. Beneath was a narrow iron staircase, descending deeper than the first basement. They descended slowly, each step echoing into the void. The space below was pitch black. When the flashlight flicked on, they saw a tiny room, barely 2 meters high and 6 square meters wide. Concrete walls, no windows, no vents. Scratches and charcoal writing covered the walls. My name is Jeremy. I miss Mom. Why doesn't Mom come? And the largest drawing, a giant bleeding eye on the wall opposite the door. Margaret couldn't cry anymore. She knelt, trembling fingers touching the crude drawing, feeling a strange warmth, as if Jeremy's presence lingered, never gone. Kelsey photographed and filmed every detail. In a corner, they found an old blanket and a broken toy, a plastic pickup truck, one wheel missing. Beneath it, a crumpled paper with childish handwriting. I'm Jemmy. I miss Mom. I promise to be good. Mom, don't forget me. Dusk fell as they left the basement, covered in dust and reeking of mold. But a storm raged in Margaret's heart. Not only had Jeremy been imprisoned, but it was systematic, planned, orchestrated by those who knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't a simple kidnapping. It was a crime disguised as faith. And if Jeremy had been transferred, as the notebook noted, how many other children shared his fate? She clenched her fists. The truth was emerging, and no one, no matter how deeply they hid, could escape it forever. Kelsey's car rolled away from Logan in the deep red twilight, leaving behind crumbling houses, withered fields, and the ruined church hiding the horrific traces of a buried past. Margaret sat in the back, her heart wrenching as she thought of what they'd seen. The scrawled drawing, the plea for help, the broken toy truck, and the airless room where Jeremy had been held, where her son learned to forget his name, to stay silent to survive. But what haunted her most was the guidebook, proof that this wasn't just a kidnapping, but a sophisticated system to control minds and erase children's identities. They decided to stop in Knoxville to meet someone who could dig deeper into that rotten past. Jim Harlan, a retired Tennessee State Police investigator renowned for handling dozens of missing persons and abuse cases in the 80s and 90s. Kelsey had contacted him for a school project and knew he still followed unsolved cases. At a quiet cafe, Jim Harlan, over 70, lean, with eyes sharp as steel, listened to every detail, from the voicemail to the basement discoveries. When Margaret played the cassette with Jeremy's and Marner's voices, Harlan frowned, gripping his coffee cup. I know that voice, he said after a pause. It's him. Margaret held her breath. Who is he, Mr. Jim? Harlan took a deep breath and began. Elwood Marner was the head pastor of a breakaway sect called the New Light Community. They preached purifying children's souls, claiming kids were born sinful and needed isolation from the secular world to be cleansed. From 1981 to 1994, at least 6 children vanished around towns where the sect operated: Logan, Polk, Aberdeen. Kelsey interjected. But no one was arrested? Harlan shook his head. Not enough evidence, no confirmed locations for their child camps. They operated covertly, moved often, and knew how to dodge authorities under the guise of religion and charity. He paused, then looked at Margaret. I remember a 1992 case in Polk County. A boy named Thomas's appeared at an elementary school with a scar behind his ear. He wouldn't talk, avoided adults, and showed extreme fear of the dark. After a few weeks, he vanished. No birth certificate, no trace of foster parents. Margaret felt her heart being squeezed. Do you have a picture of him? Harlan nodded, scrolling through his phone for a digitized old case file photo. A black and white image appeared. An 8-year-old boy, pale blonde hair, wide wary eyes, clutching his shirt. Kelsey ran facial recognition software, comparing it to Jeremy's childhood photo. The similarities emerged: ear shape, eye spacing, jawline. An 89% match. I believe it's the same person, Kelsey confirmed. Jeremy was moved to Polk as Thomas. So the question is, where did they take him after? Harlan muttered. If he's alive, he might have been transferred to another camp. Margaret opened her notebook. There's a section here that says, Transfer Thomas to Haven Farm, resting place. Harlan's eyes narrowed. Haven Farm sounds familiar. Possibly Howard's Haven for Hope, a charity farm started by a former elementary teacher, now caring for immigrant kids near the Texas border. No one's dug deep because their front looks spotless. Kelsey typed quickly. It exists. The website looks normal. Kids smiling, gardening, learning, but no direct phone number, just an email. Margaret shivered. A vague fear crept in. If her son, Jeremy, had been there, or was still there, did he remember who he was? Did he remember his mother's name? Was he alive? Was there still a chance to bring him home? Harlan handed Margaret his card. I'll contact some old colleagues, but be careful. If what you're saying is true, you're not just facing one person, it's a network. Margaret gripped the card, eyes fixed on the laptop screen where a slideshow of kids at Haven Farm played. Their smiles were too perfect, too uniform, as if cut from the same mold. And she knew, beneath those smiles, might lie dozens, hundreds of stolen memories. And one of those memories was named Jeremy Holtz. That night, Knoxville was windless, but Margaret's heart churned like an inescapable storm. She sat alone in the dim motel room, the only light from the laptop where Kelsey was reviewing the recordings one last time before sending them to an external analyst. Every clue, every trace pointed to one truth. Jeremy wasn't dead. Her son had been moved through multiple places, under false names, his memories distorted, possibly through drugs or psychological techniques, to erase the dangerous parts, those that let a child remember who they were, who they belonged to. But what happened next, from Haven Farm? From 1994 to now, had Jeremy escaped, or was he still confined under another name, another life not bearing the name Holtz? Margaret had no answers. Only one thing gave her hope, that Jeremy somehow had sent that voicemail to her. A small, risky act, proving that deep within the stolen child's memory, a part remained unerasable. The call of Mom at 2:17 a.m. As a breeze began to whisper through the trees outside, Kelsey's phone lit up. An email arrived from an anonymous address, Silent Voice 1983, at no subject, no sender name, just an attached .ogg audio file, named For Her _again. Kelsey bolted up, waking Margaret. Aunt, there's a new message. Margaret didn't need to hear more. Her trembling hand covered her mouth as Kelsey pressed play. This time, the voice was clearer. A young man, not the child's voice from before, but filled with confusion, tension, and an undeniable choked emotion. Mom, if you can still hear me, it means they haven't erased me from this world. I don't know where you are, but I know you never gave up. Don't trust anyone. What they say about me, about this place, it's all lies. I don't know who I am. They call me Elias, but I remember a name. Jeremy. The voice broke, then continued. I see red and a stuffed bear. I don't know what it is, but I remember. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Then the voice became a hurried whisper. I don't have much time. If you hear this, find Moorbridge. Someone there knows the truth. Someone named Torres. Don't trust where I'm being held. The recording ended with a metallic sound, like a locking door, and a loud thud, as if someone fell. Kelsey said nothing, only turned to Margaret. She gripped her niece's arm, eyes wet but alight with a fire absent for over 30 years. Faith. They sent the file to a digital forensics expert, requesting location signal analysis like before. But this time, a surprise, the audio came from a spoofed IP address, routed through a virtual network, indicating the sender had tech skills. Yet the metadata revealed one overlooked detail. The recording software was Moorbridge ComSys Ver 2.3, an internal communication system used in semi-public facilities in Missouri. Kelsey found the information. Moorbridge was a semi-private mental health recovery center in suburban Springfield, Missouri, funded by a religious foundation in 1997, renamed 3 times, now run by a charity called Light Path Society. No direct contact number, no public patient list. And the name Torres, likely Grant Torres, an independent investigative journalist who wrote a series on covert detention camps in the southern U.S. Margaret, remembered reading his article years ago about an Alabama reform center exposed for psychologically torturing minors. I'll find a way to contact Torres, Kelsey said, her eyes blazing with determination. If he knows anything about Moorbridge, we'll know what to do next. Margaret nodded. Everything was slowly coming into focus, like shards of a broken mirror being pieced together in silence. She didn't know where Jeremy was, or what he was still enduring. But one thing she knew for certain, he had never stopped calling for his mother. And she had never stopped listening. The second call had come, and this time, Margaret wouldn't just listen, she would answer. As the sun peeked over the Ozark Mountains, Kelsey reached Grant Torres, the man whose name surfaced in the recording like a final spark of hope in the tangled maze of lost years. Torres answered at 5:36 a.m., his voice hoarse from just waking but sharpening when Kelsey mentioned Moorbridge and the voice claiming to be Elias. "You're touching something a lot of people don't want uncovered," he said, his tone low and suggestive. "I'll meet you in St. Louis, 3 p.m. Hidden Lantern Cafe. Bring everything you have." St. Louis was damp and bustling, but not enough to dispel the chill down Margaret's spine as she stepped into the Hidden Lantern. Torres sat in the deepest corner, tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and the seasoned eyes of someone who'd seen too much horror in life. Kelsey laid out the entire story, showing him the recording, photos of the old church, Jeremy's scrawled drawings, and the voice analysis data. Torres listened without interrupting, jotting quick notes with a black fountain pen. "Elias," he said when she finished. "It's a name reused often in the Light Path Society's system. They have a habit of renaming their charges, giving kids biblical names, as part of their spiritual rebirth process. What you're investigating isn't just a facility. It's a pseudo-religious organization operating under the guise of salvation." Margaret frowned. "Pseudo-religious," Torres nodded. "Not religious in the true sense. Religious is just a mask. They borrow moral frameworks and the image of humanitarian groups, taking in orphans, immigrants, delinquent kids, to build a system of control, brainwashing, and illegal labor or medical experimentation. It's all legal on paper, but inside, it's hell." He pulled a file from his briefcase, satellite images of Moorbridge, internal schematics, staff lists, and notably, photos of a building labeled Block 4, marked as the intensive recovery area. "I had an inside contact," Torres said. "But 2 years ago, she vanished after sending me an internal report. It listed an individual, named Elias H. admitted in 2000, suffering childhood amnesia, with extreme reactions to bright lights and festival horns. But the key detail, he had no original records, no birth certificate, no family." Margaret gripped the chair. "H stands for Holtz." Torres looked at her, nodding slowly. "We can't enter Moorbridge legally. Police can't inspect without notice, because it's listed as an autonomous religious entity, exempt from annual audits. But I have a way." Kelsey jumped in. "We're ready to do anything." Torres' voice grew stern. "But the cost might be steep. If they detect anyone approaching with investigative intent, evidence could be destroyed, and the person inside, if still alive, might be moved elsewhere for good." Margaret sat silent, her gaze unwavering. She'd come too far to turn back. No matter the risk, she'd keep going. "My son is in there," she said slowly. "I won't leave while there's a chance to pull him out of hell." Torres pulled out a paper map, pointing to a forest behind the facility. "They have a hidden logistics hub in an auxiliary warehouse where staff change shifts or move internal supplies. It's their only weak point. I have someone who can help you infiltrate. But you need to be prepared. This isn't just a personal investigation anymore. It's a confrontation with a dark power structure." Margaret gave a faint smile, her first in days. "Then I'll be their nightmare." Torres looked at her. Then at Kelsey, their eyes no longer fearful, but blazing with the resolve of those with nothing left to lose. He nodded. "Then let's start. We have less than a week to plan. After that, it's an infiltration, and maybe a final rescue." Outside the cafe, the sky turned gray. Clouds folded at the horizon, signaling an approaching storm. But to Margaret, rain or not didn't matter. After nearly 4 decades of waiting, hoping and hurting, she was so close to her son, just one more step. One step to bring Jeremy back from the place they'd tried to bury him for a lifetime. 3 days after the fateful St. Louis meeting, a cold evening stretched endlessly as an old gray pickup truck quietly parked at the edge of the forest, south of Moorbridge. No rain, but the night fog was so thick the headlights couldn't pierce beyond 10 meters. Margaret sat in the back, wearing an old but warm leather jacket, clutching Jeremy's faded, frayed red cap like a final talisman. Kelsey sat up front with Torres, checking the body camera, area map, and comms one last time. Their hearts pounded as if in sync, tense, and resounding in the eerie forest silence. Moorbridge loomed through the bare trees like a nameless fortress. The main gate was locked, guarded by two men in white uniforms. But Torres wasn't aiming for that. He led Margaret and Kelsey along a side path to a rear warehouse, once used by staff to move supplies. The back door had an electronic lock, but Torres had a decoder. In minutes, the lock blinked green. They slipped into an internal hallway leading to Block 4. A stifling feeling engulfed them. The facility was vast but unnervingly silent. No voices, no footsteps, just the steady hum of an old air conditioner and the sharp smell of disinfectant. They passed sterile white corridors lined with slogans, "Toward the light," "Reborn in faith," and paintings of smiling children, eerily artificial, as if someone used color to mask a horrific truth. Block 4 was deep inside. Its door had a code lock, but Torres had the combination from an anonymous source. They entered a pitch-dark space. The hallway lights flickered, some broken, creating a dreamlike strobe effect. The first room was labeled Mind Monitoring Room. Inside were 4 wooden chairs bolted to the floor, each with leather straps for wrists and heads. A whiteboard listed names: Elias H., Noah T., Sandra Lell. Each had notes like responds well, memory re-reaction, resistant halt communication. Margaret's breath caught. Her hand shook as she saw Elias H. S. name. Jeremy. They moved on, through another hallway to individual rooms, or rather windowless square cells with thick metal doors and small slots for food. Torres opened one. It was empty, just an iron bed, gray blanket, and a charcoal drawing on the wall, a mother holding a child. Below, in scrawled English, "Don't forget me." At the 5th room they stopped. Torres signaled for silence, pressing his ear to the door. Faint, uneven breathing came from within. Kelsey tapped lightly. "Elias? Jeremy?" After a moment, a small sound like someone stepping closer. "It's Mom," Margaret whispered, voice breaking. "It's your mom, Jeremy. Can you hear me?" Silence. Then, a hoarse voice. "Mom." The door swung open. A gaunt man with tired eyes and a haggard face from sleeplessness and drugs stood staring at Margaret. On his wrist was a small scar, the scar Margaret kissed every night when Jeremy was a baby. No mistake, no doubt. Though his face had aged, hardened by years of captivity, she knew, by the instinct of a mother who carried him, held him every night. Jeremy stepped back, as if disbelieving his eyes. "Mom, is it really you?" Margaret nodded, reaching out. "It's me. It's real. I'm here, my son." He broke into sobs. The first cry burst like a flood, breaching a 30-year wall of silence. They embraced. Both trembling, Kelsey stood nearby, tears falling. Torres scanned around, as if unable to believe he was witnessing a reunion that had been a faint hypothesis for years. No time to linger. Torres signaled, "We have to go." As they left Block 4, an alarm blared. Sirens echoed through the halls. A security guard had spotted the open back door. The chase began. Torres led them, darting through a side stairwell to the cargo lot. Warning shots rang out. Margaret held Jeremy tightly, her blood freezing with fear. But this time, she didn't back down. At the truck, Kelsey floored it. Torres shattered a rear security camera with a stun gun to block tracking. The forest swallowed their vehicle, darkness enveloping them, but Margaret's heart suddenly blazed. Jeremy collapsed in her arms, exhausted. She stroked his hair, whispering as she did when he was a 6-year-old in a red cap. "I never gave up on you. I told you. I always heard your voice." And finally, after 35 years, the darkness was no longer a place to hide the truth. It was where it was born, and now, she would bring it back to the light. 3 days after the rescue, they stopped at a small cabin tucked in the woods outside Nashville, a place Torres arranged through a retired Army medic friend for Jeremy's temporary recovery. The cabin was simple, with a gas stove, a living room with a wood fireplace, and 2 small bedrooms. But to Margaret, it was paradise. For the first time in 35 years, she could wake up and see her son breathing, existing. Jeremy spent most of the first days lying silently in bed, eyes open but barely speaking. The doctor called it psychological freezing from prolonged isolation and cognitive control. Fragmented memories flashed through his mind like smeared photos: a man in a white robe, distant church bells, a hand covering his mouth in the night, and a woman's sad smile under flickering fairground sunlight. "I'm not sure if it was you or a dream," Jeremy said, voice hoarse. Margaret smiled, holding his hand. "It was both. The dream led me to you, and now you don't need to dream anymore." Kelsey contacted Tennessee's forensic lab to arrange DNA testing. A hair sample from Jeremy's brush and a small blood sample from Margaret were sent under strict confidentiality. No one dared relax, not after what they'd faced. They all knew scientific confirmation would be the final lock on a door teetering for decades. On the 5th day, the results came. Kelsey got the call from the lab. She put it on speaker, placing the phone on the table. The voice on the other end spoke evenly, professionally. "The samples show a maternal kinship match of 99.9987%. Jeremy Holtz is the biological son of Margaret Holtz." Silence. Margaret wept. Not sobs, not screams, just tears falling onto her hands like early rain after a long drought. She turned to Jeremy, sitting by the fireplace, looking at a photo of himself at 6, smiling in his red cap at the fair. He touched the photo lightly, then whispered, "I remember this smile. I don't know why, but I do." Margaret walked over, embracing her son. This time, Jeremy hugged her back tightly. No hesitation, no doubt. It was the embrace he'd waited a lifetime for, without knowing its name. And now, as everything shattered, what remained was raw maternal love, something no one, no organization could sever. Torres returned to the cabin that afternoon, his face tense, carrying a thick, sealed file. "I have bad news and good news," he said. "The good news, thanks to your evidence, we've filed to reopen the Elwood Marner and affiliated facilities case. A federal investigation is starting, under the banner of anti-human trafficking and psychiatric abuse." Margaret nodded, "And the bad news?" Torres slowly placed the file on the table. "The Light Path Society has multiple layers of cover. They moved Jeremy through at least 3 facilities. There may be more kids unidentified, and worse, most records are destroyed. We've only scratched the surface." A heavy silence settled over the cabin. But Margaret didn't tremble anymore. She looked at Jeremy and said, "Then we'll do the rest. If we saved one, there's a way to save others." Jeremy paused, then spoke softly. "Mom, I don't know what I can do. My head's a mess. But if there's anyone like me, I want them to be called by their real names too." Torres looked at them both, then nodded. "Then we start by exposing this story. No hiding, no silence. I'll bring it to light." That night, by the flickering fireplace, Jeremy opened his mother's old notebook, the one where she'd logged every detail of her search. He read each page slowly, as if mending his own shattered memories. At the last page, where Margaret had written in trembling script, "If you're alive, I'll never stop looking," he picked up a pen and wrote below, "I lived, and you kept your word." He paused, looking up at her. "Now it's my turn. I promise, you'll never have to search again." It was a promise. No oaths, no repetition needed. But to Margaret, it was the most beautiful ending to days that seemed never to have dawned. And it was a beginning, a new journey, not just for recovery, but for justice. Not just for Jeremy, but for all the children called by names not their own. On September 29, 2019, exactly 36 years after that fateful afternoon at the Cedar Hollow Fair, a blue car pulled over by the road leading to the town park. Early autumn air was crisp, maple leaves blanketed the ground, and colorful flags fluttered as if untouched by pained shadow. But this year, everything was different. Margaret Holtz stepped out in an elegant gray dress, silver hair neatly pinned, her wrinkled face lit with bright eyes. Beside her was Jeremy, now 39, gaunt but upright, calm, holding the hand of his 6-year-old daughter, Layla. Behind them were Kelsey, carrying a camera, and Torres, walking slowly, as if guarding the world. Fair music played, the smell of popcorn mixing with damp earth. Locals barely noticed anything special, just curious glances at the quiet group, Jeremy's eyes scanning every corner, as if sifting through dusty memories. There, Margaret stopped, pointing to the park's left corner. "That's where you asked to go to the stuffed animal stall." Jeremy looked, nodding faintly. "I remember, not clearly, but I remember red." and a clown with a trumpet. They walked there, now a row of water balloon games for kids. Margaret stood still, then pulled an old photo from her purse. 6-year-old Jeremy, beaming in her arms. She placed it in a small wooden frame by an old maple tree, adding a white daisy. Below was a handwritten sign in black ink. Returned from silence. For the children who vanished. A few passers-by stopped. A little girl asked her mother, "Who's that?" The mother whispered something, and they stood watching. Slowly, more gathered, silent. No murmurs, no noise. The quiet spread, like thin fog over children's laughter. Torres handed Jeremy a local paper, fresh off the press. The front page blared. Light Path Society Child Detention Network, dismantled, 7 arrested, dozens of victims' identities confirmed. Marner's black and white photo showed an aged face with cold eyes. Torres said, he was caught in New Mexico, hiding under a false name. No defense. He won't escape. Jeremy flipped to the middle. A photo of him at the cabin with Margaret and Lila was paired with his quote, "I don't remember everything, but I remember I'm my mother's son. And that's enough to keep living." The case expanded federally, with old files reopened. Thanks to Margaret, Kelsey, and Torres' evidence, 37 other children had their true identities confirmed. 11 reunited with families, the rest in psychological and legal recovery. A task force, Project Remember, was formed to aid victims of similar memory loss cases. Margaret was invited to speak before Congress next month. She'd prepared her speech, but today, she chose silence. Today wasn't for crowds. It was for something deeper. A journey home. Jeremy sat on an old bench under the tree where Margaret left bears and flowers for 35 years. He lifted Lila beside him, his gaze calm. "I used to think, if I found you, I'd ask why you didn't come sooner," he said, voice soft as the breeze. "But now I understand, you came every day, by never giving up, by remembering me, even when I forgot who I was." Margaret squeezed his hand. "I didn't know how strong I was until I had no choice. And Jeremy, you never truly left me. The world just hid you too deep." A boy ran by, wearing a bright red cap. Jeremy watched, eyes wet. The boy turned, smiling at him, a pure, unscarred smile. In that moment, Jeremy knew he'd never reclaim his lost childhood. But he also understood he held something more precious now. A future. And in that future, he was the father of a child who would never know the darkness of being forgotten. Lila looked up. "Daddy, is this where you played before?" Jeremy smiled. "Yes, but back then, I was alone. Now I have you and Grandma. Were you scared?" He squeezed her hand. "Yes, but Grandma came, and now I'm not scared anymore." As the sun set, golden light bathed the park. Jeremy pulled a small, crumpled paper from his pocket, the one from Block 4, where he'd scrawled in charcoal, "I'm Jemmy. I miss Mom." He handed it to Margaret. She took it, hands trembling, then folded it carefully, tucking it into her wallet beside the old photo. "I missed you," he repeated. Margaret looked at him, eyes gleaming in the dusk. "And I found you." And that was the end. Not a cinematic finale, with applause and lights, but a real, raw, scarred, profound end, and a beginning. A new life, where the name Jeremy Holtz was no longer buried under false files, where the boy lost in 1983 was called by his true name and held by the right person. That day, amid the crowd, no one realized they were witnessing a miracle. But in the quiet corner where maples whispered, a family had rewoven a thread, thought severed. And in the lively fair music, a voice, small but clear, whispered in Margaret's heart, "I'm home." The story, Little Boy Vanished at County Fair in 1983. In 2018, a mysterious voice message shocks. His family is not just a journey to reclaim a child stolen from his mother's arms, but a piercing reminder of the dangerous gaps in America's child protection system, especially when religion, charities, and autonomy are abused as shields for crimes. The case of Jeremy Holtz, the boy abducted at the 1983 Cedar Hollow Fair, reflects a troubling reality about organizations like the Light Path Society, which operated in the shadows for decades, renaming children, erasing identities, and reprogramming memories, making recovery near impossible. Yet, what makes this story a symbol of hope is the unrelenting power of maternal love, embodied by Margaret, who never changed her phone number, never left town, and kept every detail of her son for over 30 years. In a society where information can be erased with a click, preserving evidence, faith, and personal connection is the strongest weapon against oblivion. Moreover, the story highlights the role of the younger generation, like Kelsey, who used digital skills and initiative to unlock doors her elders couldn't. The greatest lesson is in today's layered American society, where identities can be altered and justice sometimes arrives late. Family, perseverance, and technology are the core elements to reclaim truth and heal those thought lost. If you believe no journey is hopeless when fueled by love and truth, subscribe to the channel to join us in exposing forgotten secrets. Thank you for following Jeremy Holtz's story. See you in the next video, where justice has more to tell.